Hello, golf fans, and welcome to episode 76 of the Weesesports Chronicles podcast. I'm lukasweese, your host. Thank you so much for taking the time. The Weesports Chronicles podcast this week is doing daily episodes because it is Masters Week. And while the Masters normally takes place in the spring, in April, it takes place in November this year under strange and unique circumstances, but will take any bit a semblance of normalcy in this year. Given that the Masters is this week, I'm doing daily podcasts starting today, Monday, all the way through the conclusion of the Masters on Sunday. I have the opportunity to speak with some of the best and brightest minds in golf media as we navigate through the storylines of this fantastic Masters tournament, as well as breaking down what happens during the 2020 Masters. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday will be pre-tournament dialogue, whereas Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday will be more reactionary podcasts to what we've been seeing on the golf course. For episode 76 today, I'm pleased to be joined by Bob Harig. Bob is a senior golf writer for ESPN. Bob and I have a wide-ranging conversation about covering this Masters tournament with no spectators, to his responsibilities, not only writing for ESPN, but also as a broadcaster, given that ESPN has some of the broadcasting rights of the Masters. We also talk about Bob's experience covering major championships and his approach that he takes during these special weeks. And then we dig deeper into some of the storylines that are headlining this year's unprecedented Masters tournament. The Weesports Chronicles podcast is available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. So make sure to like, rate, watch, and subscribe to all three of those channels. Enjoy the Masters, and now let's get started with the Masters week of podcasts on the Weesports Chronicles with Bob Harig of ESPN. Bob, welcome. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. Glad to do it. Love talking about the Masters. It's a good subject. So looking forward to getting going.
Absolutely. And of course, it is in April for the listeners listening. It is November, and it's actually one of one of three times that the Masters has been held not in its normal April date. So obviously it's where we are right now in 2020, such a strange, unprecedented year. But I'm just curious, Bob, what your thoughts are heading into next week. We're recording this podcast just a week before the Masters. You are going to be there live at Augusta National. So just your thoughts on reporting this historic event.
Yeah, it's going to be unique. I think we're all sort of curious to see what we find when we get there. What's it going to look like? What's it going to be like without spectators? How will the golf course play? It's just so many unknowns. And, I think this is why the idea of having it, even in these tough times, even without spectators, it's going to be different in some ways. I think people might not like it, but I do think that it gives us sort of an opportunity to get a look at a very, very famous place at a different time when we normally wouldn't do it. And with the knowledge that, the next Masters is only 5 months away. I'm just, there's many, many things I'm curious about. And, I think it's just going to be an odd situation to be there and not see fans and not be the yelling and the noise and all that sort of stuff. But I think we've come to terms with that in sports right now. That's just the way it is, and it's probably going to be that while for a bit longer. And so now it's the Masters' turn to see how they pull it off.
You mentioned some things that are going to be different, of course. No spectators in attendance, and for anyone that's watched the Masters or attended the Masters knows the roars of Augusta are always so prevalent, and even the golfers can hear, which sort of lets them know what they have to do on a certain hole. But in addition to that, Bob, what are you most interested in seeing regarding how Augusta is going to play in November compared to the normal April time slot?
Yeah, it's interesting. This is a topic that's obviously very much at the forefront of what we're all wondering. But in April, the conditions can be wildly different. It can be very, very warm. It can be dry. The course could be firm and fast. It could be very cold. It could be chilly and windy. It could be damp. We could have a little of both. We could have some rain that softens it, and then it gets windy and firm. It could be hot early in the week and then cools off. And so I'm not sure it's going to play that much different than any other random year in April. We don't get the same conditions in the spring every year. It can go from being a week in the 50s and, very chilly and cold mornings to a very, temperate 70 degrees, 75 every day with chilly mornings, but it warms up. And so that impacts the golf. The main thing is, will it be firm and fast, or is it going to be soft? And obviously, a lot of that has to do with if we get rain. Uh, it's still early. There is a little rain in the early week forecast, but I don't think every day they have that sub-air system to suck the water out of the fairways and get things drier. I think we all would love to have a firm, fast Masters, and instead of the ball rolling into the rough, with pine cones, maybe we're going to see leaves. I don't know. It's been warm, so I don't know that the leaves have fallen there yet. They've had a pretty warm stretch up to this point. I don't know that fall has kicked in, but it might next week, and that would add another element to this. So I think the golf course isn't necessarily going to play a whole lot different than what we're used to, based on the weather. It could be a weather week that we would have in April.
Of course, and we also may not see the azaleas in full bloom
Mm-hmm.
like we normally do in April, and so many of us love those images. But it's also interesting, I think, too, Bob, about the golfers coming into this week, because no, in a normal year with the Masters in April, a lot of the golfers, they're sort of preparing from like January to April, right? With the California swing and then the players in March, all sort of leading up to this first major. But now that the Masters is the third and final major of 2020, how do you think just the truncated change in schedule will affect guys coming into this week? Because I feel like there's just going to be a disparity. Some guys have played more leading up to this week, and whereas others not so much.
Yeah, there was a kind of a defined timeline leading up to the Masters when it's in April. And guys would kind of set their schedule with that in the back of their mind. Maybe not so much in January, but as February rolled around, they're looking at a number of events that they have to pick and choose from. And if you start as early as the Genesis Invitational Tigers event at Riviera, you have that. The following week, you had a World Golf event in Mexico. Then after that, you had the Honda in Florida, Bay Hill, the Players Championship, another big tournament. 2 weeks after that, the match play. So you had a smattering of events that were pretty big to choose from, and a guy could be as competitive or tournament ready as he wanted to be. Now the choices are different. After the U.S. Open in September, there was obviously going to be a little bit of a lull. There was a fairly big buildup to that through the end of the PGA Tour season of 2020. And guys, then the U.S. Open was 2 weeks after the Tour Championship, and some guys needed to take a deep breath. And now, here's the Masters right around the corner. The Tour did give them three pretty solid events right here the last month. The two in Las Vegas. The second one was the relocated CJ Cup, and then the Zozo Championship. We saw a lot of guys at those three tournaments. I think they saw those as their pre-tournament, pre-Masters prep. There's a good number of guys playing the Houston Open this week who would normally like to play the week before the Masters, and as it has happened in many years before, not anymore, the Houston Open was the week before the Masters, so at least the location is the same. But I definitely think it's different. And then you had some guys, look, the situation we're in, we've had some guys who tested positive for COVID. Mm-hmm. Number one, Dustin Johnson. He missed two tournaments he would have played. He's playing in Houston, but he was supposed to play Vegas and Zozo. Adam Scott was supposed to play Zozo, tested positive. He's playing in Houston. Tony Finau missed 2 tournaments because of it. So that has figured into it as well. So you've got guys coming at this from completely different frames of reference from what we're used to.
Absolutely. And I'll get to some of the players and the storylines in just a bit, but Mike Davis, the CEO of USGA at the US Open, mentioned something really interesting in how back in March and April, when sports were shutting down, including golf, that there was this meeting between all the heads, PGA Tour, and all the heads of the 4 major governing bodies of golf. And there was a chance where the US Open couldn't be played in September, and it's in that time slot. And I'm just curious, Bob, from your reporting, how close was Augusta to potentially not having the Masters this year?
I don't know if it was close, but I think it was certainly on the table. And the reason being more that, they want it to be perfect. And they want to do it absolutely right. And now what you've done is you had this build up to the April Masters that they had been planning for. It's a year-long exercise. They have a system. They break down the previous one, and then they start getting ready for the next one. And obviously when the club opens in October, they're looking ahead to April, and they had all that time leading up to it. And then 3 weeks before it gets postponed, and they actually closed the club, so now the golf course isn't being used, and there's other things in play. And so then they don't even have a date. It took another 3-4 weeks before they picked this date. And I think it's safe to assume that they clearly thought they were giving themselves enough time for us to be back to normal by now. It was 7 months, early April, when they picked this date, and looking 7 months ahead, I think probably we all felt, okay, spectators will be back. It might not be exactly the same, but it'll be more normal, and then we'll have another Masters in April. Obviously, that hasn't happened. And so I think from their standpoint, there might have been some of that. Also knowing that as soon as this ends, they got the next one right down the pike. And a lot of uncertainty about that now, too. Are there going to be spectators in April? Are we going to be at the point where we can do that even then? So, these are huge undertakings running these golf tournaments. There's a reason why they're only once a year. And so I don't know if it was close. I think they really wanted to play it. I think they really wanted to play it with spectators. And having seen other tournaments go on without spectators, I'm guessing helped push them over the line to say, okay, we can do that too. And so here we are, and it's going to be unique, but a credit to them, I think, for trying to pull it off and giving the players the opportunity to have a Masters this year. We pretty much had after that shutdown, a really robust schedule. For golf, things have worked out pretty nicely.
No, absolutely, and I certainly credit what the governing bodies have done, the players, the PGA Tour, just in terms of the protocols and getting over that little bump in the road to ensure that golf can be played safely. To that point, Bob, is Augusta National going to be testing players before they come to the course, as well as media and other necessary people that are going to be on site?
Yes. I mean, just like all the tour events, the players and caddies are required to be tested before they can go on site. And it's the same for the media, which isn't the case at every PGA Tour event, but is at the Masters. And, it's one little step in the process of trying to keep everyone safe. As we've learned, it's not a foolproof process. You can take a test and be negative and, have picked up the virus the day or two before, and it's not going to show up, but it does give you some sense, I think, if you're doing the right thing. So, yeah, and obviously that, from the player's standpoint, if somebody tests positive, they're out of the Masters, so it's a huge deal, for that to occur. So, fingers crossed that everybody makes it through this week in Houston too. If anybody were to test positive there, that puts the Masters in jeopardy for them as well. So, this is the new world we're living with right now. It's a little bit dicey, and through no fault of their own, you could get caught up in this if you're not lucky.
Bob, you've covered several Masters. Maybe you can take the listeners through sort of your process when covering this tournament, because ESPN is one of the broadcast rights holders along with CBS. So I'm just curious how this week is so different than so many of the other tournaments that you cover as a golf writer.
Yeah, well, even if it weren't the pandemic, the Masters is a different challenge. We've all pretty much in this world gotten used to having our phones attached to our hip and, looking at our phones and texting and tweeting and all those things. And you can't do that at the Masters. You can't take your phone out of the media center. It cannot be brought onto the golf course. So that's one aspect that takes some getting used to. Where we're located is a bit of a distance from the course too. So you need to kind of, plot your timing and as to if you're going to go out there, like, okay, how long is it going to take me to get there? There's a shuttle system usually. If I spend 2 hours out here, I'm out of communication with my superiors, with my place of employment, what they might want from me. So you've got that to work through. And in these times, the access to the players is limited too. With they're trying to obviously make sense. We are not going to have crowded interview sessions. We are not going to have a swarm of people in the interview room. It's going to actually be less. They're actually having indoor interviews, just very well spaced. The outdoor interviews where some of the players would go if they don't come to the interview room. There will be some opportunities there, but obviously limited. You can't have 20 of us packed in together trying to interview Tiger, which happens, at the Masters. That won't happen this time for obvious reasons. We can't do that right now. So those are some of the challenges. I like to get there, walk the golf course, just get a feel for it, see if anything's changed. It sort of gives you a good vibe. It's kind of a good working vibe to get out there and see what it looks like. And take it all in again, and then there's just a dozen storylines every Masters that you have to pursue. And this year, I think we're going to be looking at what's it going to look like out there? What's it going to play like with no spectators? Bryson is obviously a big story with his added length. Tiger, defending champion. Dustin Johnson, number one in the world. Can Rory get the career Grand Slam? Does Phil have another one in him? There's a lot of things that we have to pursue, which is what makes it such a great event.
So you mentioned how there's all these storylines. Of course, any Masters has them, but especially this one this year. Do you pick, how many weeks before do you pick the storylines that you are going to focus on? And then how many do you sort of reserve for the tournament to, let's say, let a storyline happen that you may not have predicted?
Right. Yeah. It's funny. In normal times, in the April time frame, we start sort of brainstorming ideas in the fall, like now, like this time of year. We kind of come up with a laundry list of things that we want to work on, and we had done that last year. Some of them ran in April. Some of them will run again. Some of them never saw the light of day and will. But there obviously were a lot of things coming off of last year's Masters to pursue in relation to Tiger. We had a big piece that ran in April. It'll run again here next week, where we talked to dozens of people throughout the sports world and actually the entertainment world too. Where were you? What were you doing when Tiger won the Masters? And, it's pretty, obviously it shows how popular that win was and how big of a deal it was. So those sorts of things we're working on in advance leading up. And a lot of that stuff is done before we get there. Then what you do is, we typically do is we just sort of try to react to what happens, what's said, who's doing what, what they're saying about the course, what they're saying about the speed of the greens, maybe. Maybe there's an interesting story among one of the amateurs that's so you sort of wait for that week. Obviously, we've got a lot of that to deal with next week. There's going to be so much new that I think it's imperative to wait and see. What do we see? What does it look like? How does it play? What do the players think of it? And how does it sound? I've said this many times. I mean, can you imagine Tiger winning the way he did last year with nobody around the 18th green? I mean, part of that makes me a little sad, because that was such a great scene, a moment for history forever, and so that it won't look that way this year. And will that take away from it?
Bob, let's go to that Masters last year, because I think it's been over a year since that epic win happened of Tiger, and it not only was such a historic moment for golf, but everyone in the sports and entertainment world, as you said, talked about that moment. I'm just curious, a year later, what was something that you remembered from that day that maybe doesn't get talked about as much, but that just sort of captures the essence of what that moment meant for the sport of golf?
Well, I'm not sure that I think it's been talked about, but the greeting that he got coming off of 18 from all the other players who waited, several of whom he's just beat, the fact that they were there to congratulate him and sort of revel in that win with him, I thought was really, really neat. That didn't happen in 97 when he won the Masters. That didn't happen in 01 and 02 and 05. Those were singular victories, a guy who was on top and who was expected to maybe do that. This time it was completely different. I mean, if you think about it, Tiger didn't do a whole lot leading up to the Masters last year. I mean, he did okay. He was 20th at Torrey Pines. He was 15th at Riviera. He was 10th in Mexico. He didn't have a great Players Championship, but he was 5th at the match play. He actually made it to the quarterfinals. And so his results were trending nicely, but he wasn't really contending. Then he wins the Masters. Then he plays 6 more times in the rest of that season. The PGA, he missed the cut. The U.S. Open, he tied for 20th, I think. Didn't really do anything. Didn't look good. So like he had this pre-tournament stretch of 4 or 5 events where he was okay but not great. Then wins the Masters. Then has 6 tournaments where he really doesn't do anything. I mean, so there was like a 12, 13 tournament stretch there where the Masters is where it all came together. And lightning in a bottle, I think that's harsh. I don't think that was the case. Certainly Tiger didn't get lucky. He played very, very nicely, did what he had to do. But he put it together that 1 week, and then it was a long time again before he put it together. He won again last fall and played great there for a couple of months, Hero and at the President's Cup. And now all of 2020 really hasn't done anything. So, we might look back on it on like how even more unlikely that win was, given what we've seen him deal with, before and after.
Well, and for me, watching it as a viewer from home, Tiger, it's the first of his majors where he's won coming from behind. Other than that shot on 16, it wasn't like he had like the big long putt or the great shot. It was just sort of plodding along. Then all the golfers making those mistakes at the 12th hole, the par 3. But then I just think of that moment on the 18th, and you made the great point about how, like, if there were no fans there, would have had the same impact. Because I remember CBS doing like 2 minutes of just silence and letting the pictures tell the story, and Tiger hugging his kids and just everyone around there yelling Tiger. And I just think that it sort of alludes to the column that you wrote recently, how, Tiger coming into this Masters maybe not playing as well, but he knows this course better than almost everyone out there. And I think we have to really appreciate that, especially in terms of giving him somewhat of a chance to defend the title.
I think we're fools to write him off. You never know. And, he's been working on things for Augusta. He always Tiger's not comfortable hitting a draw. He'd rather hit a fade, a draw off the tee. It's a shot that gives him some trouble once in a while. And he really needs to hit a draw off a 10. He really needs to hit a draw off a 13, 14 to some extent. Those are shots that he had down last year, and being able to curve it around the corner at 13 is really big. And on Sunday, he did it, we, as you noted, the great shot on 16, obviously, but he hit two pretty good shots to get to the 13th and two on 15. He gave himself easy birdies. Not everybody did that. He hit the shot he needed on 12. Hit it right smack dab in the middle of the green. He had a long putt, but it was in the middle of the green, while the other guys were messing around in the water. So is he able to, to find that in this time? Is the short game solid enough to make up for when you're inevitably going to miss greens? He certainly knows the greens. And I think the place gives him a boost, So I certainly wouldn't put it past him. But there's been some troubling things that we've seen, throughout the post shutdown golf of his. He's not played the par fives great, not dominated them like he needs to. Just not giving himself enough chances. And mostly because he's not getting it in play off the tee to where he can hit a great second shot up there. Can he get that dialed in? I think that's the great mystery that we're all kind of looking forward to seeing.
Another one of the storylines, as you mentioned, is Bryson DeChambeau, who's the 2020 U.S. Open champion, and there's rumors that he's going to use a 48-inch driver, and I mean, I'm just curious, Bob, if he dominates Augusta with that big long power game and being able to hit, bombs off the tee and driving greens, will this lead to a change from the higher ups of the PGA Tour in terms of distance? Because I know that even Tiger mentioned, I think at the Zozo, that you sort of let the genie out of the bottle, right? In terms of distance, and now this is what's happened, and here's Bryson just sort of exposing a loophole in the game and succeeding.
Yeah, Tiger actually, I think, got his metaphors and cliches mixed up. He said that he let the genie out of the bag.
Yeah.
We knew what he meant.
Yeah.
And, this is a hard one because a rollback of equipment is not easy. I get where people are coming from when they say that, but if you take 10% off the ball, do we really want a player to go from hitting at 300 to 270? I don't know that that's the answer at this point. Maybe there could be a slight reduction, a couple of percentage points in the ball. And then other things. You can do things like, the face of the driver, the loft of the driver, has to be a certain loft. That there's other equipment measures that possibly could make things be less, I guess to where they can't, hit it the way they're hitting it. And so, but none of these things are easy. I just don't think any of them are an easy solution. But is making golf courses longer and longer the best way to do this? Is growing rough up to their knees the best way to do this? There's just so many aspects to the whole distance issue that I'm not sure what they should do. One thing I will say about Bryson, though, is he still has to get the ball on the green. He still has to chip. He still has to make putts. As impressive as that stuff has been for him, he's followed through on the other aspects of the game. And Augusta's no easy place. I mean, just because you bomb it out there doesn't mean you're gonna be able to knock it close and make the putt. So it's going to be interesting to see. I wish there was an easy answer to this dilemma, because you can't keep going and have golf courses remain relevant given what we're seeing.
No, for sure. And I think the point that you made about Augusta being difficult, like TV just doesn't do justice for the slopes of the greens, and especially if it's
Mhm.
firm and fast. Bryson will still need his short game to be on tip top shape for him to contend. Bob, I mean, like I said earlier, you've covered a lot of Masters, and there's something as a journalist I feel, whether it's Tiger last year or who knows what happens this year, of writing that final round story and whatever it happens. Is that one of the best moments for you as a writer, being able to get to that space and write that really great column or story? And do you feel like, especially this year, maybe extra pressure to really succeed, just given where the Masters is in November and how important this event is given the 2020 that we've had?
Hey, I sometimes feel pressure just turning on this computer. Clicking on, yeah. Yeah, just getting a few paragraphs down. I mean, I think the bigger the moment, the more pressure you feel.
Mm.
Certainly last year when Tiger won, you know how epic that was. You know how big of a deal it was. You know how much that is going to be consumed. Um, and, you want to do your best to capture it. And I think that's the trick, you know. None of us knew starting out that day what was going to happen at the end, and then all of a sudden it all comes together, and you've got kind of a relatively short period of time, to put it in words they're going to live on, and so yeah, there is some pressure there, I think. I think most self-inflicted. We all want to do a good job. We want to capture it the best we can. We want the person who reads that story to come away thinking and saw something that maybe in the print world, in the digital world, to give them something they're not going to get because it's covered so, top to bottom these days. It's all over TV. They're streaming things in golf. There's all kinds of people commenting, through social media. And, there's only so much that the players are going to say. Can you find something that wasn't visible on TV or through these other means? And I think that's the trick, and I think that's what we're all trying to do. And sometimes it's a day later when you get a chance to catch up to more people. But yeah, I always look forward to that.
How have you adjusted just this year? I know so many journalists that I've had on the show have just spoken about that adjustment phase just because of the fact that they may not have access to players, access to people because of the pandemic. Have you found that adjustment challenging, or do you think that the relationships that you've built in the game have still allowed you to tell really compelling stories?
No, there's no question it's been a big challenge. It wasn't so much of a challenge during the shutdown.
Mm.
We were all in the same predicament. Nobody was doing anything. There was no golf being played, although there was a lot of news being created. That wasn't so difficult. The contacts and the people that through all of that make that easier to weather. But once they started playing, now the players are away from home and they're back into their normal realm. And I don't find myself trying to get a hold of players when they're at tournaments. I just sort of feel like unless it's an emergency, it's a big ask. My job is to get them at tournaments, and unfortunately, I wasn't going to very many. For various reasons. We had our issues too in terms of how much are we going to go out, when are we going to go out, and I didn't get to that many tournaments, and that was a detriment to doing this job. And there's just no getting around that. For the majority of my time at ESPN, I'm out there a good bit, and what I'm asked to do relates to that. If my job weren't covering tournament golf, it wouldn't matter so much. But covering tournament golf from home and getting on Zoom calls and watching it on TV, it's just not the same thing. So yeah, it's been a huge challenge, and it will continue to be. I mean, there's certain decisions that have to be made as to what we're going to go to, travel, and how much access are we going to get. That's loose loosened up a little bit. Actually, golf has been good in that regard. Unlike the other sports where, baseball, basketball, football, they're not, we get a little bit more leeway. We're able to get players in person, distanced, obviously, but that's really important to be able to do that, because that way you get a little one-on-one time. It's not always a group. I think from the golf standpoint, we've got an opportunity that other sports don't have, and I hope we're able to take advantage of it.
One of the interesting things that your network ESPN is doing is on Saturday. It's cross-platforming with ESPN College Game Day to have game day at Augusta National. I don't know if you know the ins and outs or whatnot, but was Augusta National pretty, accepting of that reality, or did it take much convincing to have game day come to Augusta National for this really unique opportunity?
It's a great question. I wish I knew the answer. I don't know how that came down. I guess I would say I'm somewhat surprised. That's really out of Augusta's comfort zone to do something like that. It probably works better because there are no fans, because that game day environment typically has a lot of fans with it. I do wonder, just as, a consumer of the sport like everyone else, not an ESPN employee, if not having a par 3 contest had some impact on that, because the par 3 would have been something ESPN would have televised. That would have been a live thing on Wednesday, which isn't happening. Now, I'm sure there'll be other Masters programming, but not a live thing like that. I wonder if they negotiated in some way. All right, look, we can't do that, but can we do something else? And they went to them with the College Game Day idea. From Augusta's point of view, it's a great way to still promote the golf, because you have a lot of people that tune into that college football show who might just be casual golf people, or they might not really care that much. And obviously college football is going to dominate. And it might say to them, hey, you know what? I'm going to watch this today, and I'll put the college football aside for those couple of hours. And so from their standpoint, I think it's pretty shrewd, because it might bring more people on board, especially if they have a great weekend setting up, a good storyline, it's close, some big names are in the mix. You're going to be talking about going into the weekend. Now, granted, the show is going to be mostly about college football, but there's going to be some golf talk in there. It's inevitable. And, that's, I think, is a good thing for the Masters.
You got your first exposure to golf as a caddy at Inverness Golf Club. You began contributing to ESPN.com in 1997. How have you evolved, Bob, as a golf writer over the years? And what do you think someone who's aspiring to be a broadcaster and cover golf needs to have in 2020 to succeed in an ever-changing industry?
The big word I use there is versatility, because when I was coming up, I didn't have versatility. I was a print newspaper guy through and through. I mean, there wasn't the social media that we have today. There wasn't the internet like we have today. It was fledgling at that time. It wasn't a big deal. I wrote for a newspaper, and you wrote your story and nobody saw it until the next day. Now we write things and it's immediate, and you've got to be able to do things like this. I do TV some, I'm on radio, I do podcasts like this, I take video sometimes, I have to do essays. These are all things I never did in a previous life, and you have to write long stories, you have to write game stories, you have to write features, columns, long form. That's why I say versatile, but I think the big thing it all goes back to is all of those things require really good reporting. You're not gonna do a good job in any of those things if you don't report. And that means, doing your research, asking questions, seeing things, getting out there. And, getting out there obviously is the key. That's the starting point for all that reporting.
Last question for you, Bob. In all your years covering the Masters, what's been your most memorable moment as a golf writer and why?
Well, there have been several. I mean, I hate to go with recency bias, but it's really hard to top last year. I mean, it really is. I mean, I was there for his first one, and that was obviously historic for many reasons. And, there have been a lot of really good ones along the way. There have been some great Masters over the years. I was there when Norman blew it against Faldo, too. Now obviously all of Tiger and Phil's wins were really, really compelling. But it's just really hard to top last year when you factor in all the different things. I mean, it had been 11 years since Tiger won a Masters, since he had won a major championship. It had been 14 years since he last won the Masters. All the things that he had gone through. Really, just 2 years prior is when he had the spinal fusion surgery that, could have ended his career. And he was at the Masters Champions Dinner in 2017 telling people he thought he might be done. And so 2 years later at age, I guess, what was he? He was 43. At age 43 to win the Masters and beat all those guys, Xander, Dustin Johnson, Koepka, Webb Simpson, they were all up there. It's just hard to top that. I mean, it was such a enormous win for him, for the sport. And, obviously filled with a lot of drama on that last day.
Bob Harig is a senior golf writer for ESPN. Make sure to check out Bob's work during Masters Week across all ESPN platforms. Bob, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today on this Masters edition of the Weesports Chronicles podcast.
Thanks for having me. Enjoy the week.